from Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Although the Turkish Coast Guard followed closely behind the Canadian and Irish vessels, both boats made it out to international waters safely and began the long journey to Gaza. The main obstacle now that could prevent both boats from reaching their final destination is the Israeli response.
And that response came Friday. The Israeli Navy boarded the Irish and Canadian ships of the Freedom Waves flotilla that was challenging the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza. They detained all the occupants on board. Democracy Now! Correspondent Jihan Hafetz was deported 4 days later. She landed just hours ago here in New York. She'll describe her experiences for the first time today on Democracy Now! Then another Democracy Now! Exclusive, 5,000 Haitians sue the UN for bringing cholera into Haiti, allowing it to spread, then covering up their role in the outbreak that devastated Haiti in the aftermath of the January 2010 earthquake. Some 450,000 Haitians have been sickened. More than 6,000 have died. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Syrian troops have launched a bloody assault to retake Homs, Syria's third-largest city. Less than a week after agreeing to an Arab League peace deal, the Syrian government's begun waging what many are saying is its most violent crackdown in the 8-month uprising. At least 110 people have been killed in the past 5 days in Homs. The United Nations says at least 3,500 people have now been killed in Syria since the crackdown began in mid-March. The Arab League has called for an emergency meeting, but it won't be held until Saturday. Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi is coming under increasing pressure to resign as Italy struggles to deal with its worsening economic crisis. Earlier today, one of Berlusconi's main coalition partners, Umberto Bossi of the Northern League, urged him to step aside ahead of a crucial budget vote. With the third biggest economy in the Eurozone, the economic crisis facing Italy is considered to be far more dangerous than Greece. Many economists believe Italy's borrowing costs are approaching levels that may force the nation to ask for a massive bailout, far larger than the bailouts for Greece, Ireland, or Portugal. A woman accused Republican presidential hopeful Herman Cain of improperly touching her in 1997 while he was head of the National Restaurant Association. At least 2 other women have lodged formal complaints against Cain when he was head of the association, but Sharon Bialek has become the first to appear in public and make a statement. Bialek said she and Cain had dinner together in Washington, D.C., and she asked him to help her find a job. She said the incident took place in a parked car after dinner.
I thought that we were going to go into the offices so that he could show me around. At that time, I had on a black pleated skirt, a suit jacket, and a blouse. He had on a suit with his shirt open. But instead of going into the offices, he suddenly reached over and he put his hand on my leg, under my skirt, and reached for my genitals. He also grabbed my head and brought it towards his crotch. I was very, very surprised and very shocked. I said, "What are you doing? You know I have a boyfriend. This isn't what I came here for." Mr. Cain said, "You want a job, right?" I asked him to stop, and he did. I asked him to take me back to my hotel, which he did right away.
Speaking at a news conference in New York, Sharon Bialek explained why she had decided to speak publicly about Herman Cain.
I'm coming forward to give a face and a voice to those women who cannot, or for whatever reasons do not wish to come forward, and on behalf of all women who are sexually harassed in the workplace but do not come out of fear of retaliation or in public humiliation. I really didn't want to be here today and wouldn't have been here if it had not been for the 3 other women who have alleged sexual harassment against Mr. Cain. I want you, Mr. Cain, to come clean. Just admit what you did.
Republican presidential hopeful Herman Cain is planning to respond to the accusation at a news conference today. In an interview with Jimmy Kimmel, Cain said, quote, "There's not an ounce of truth in all these accusations." Well, it's voting day in many parts of the country. In Ohio, polling suggests voters may be on track to defeat legislation that would ratify Republican Governor John Kasich's controversial limits to the collective bargaining rights of state employees. The issue was placed on the ballot after a group created after Kasich's law was passed this spring gathered 1.3 million signatures to oppose the measure. The architect of Arizona's controversial anti-immigration laws fighting to defend his position in the state Senate amidst a recall election today. Russell Pierce is being challenged by fellow Republican Jerry Lewis. Pierce wrote Senate Bill 1070, which forces police to investigate the immigration status of people they have lawfully detained. Meanwhile, in Mississippi, citizens are voting on a bill that would establish a fertilized human egg as a person. Both the Republican and Democratic candidates for governor in Mississippi are in favor of the measure, which would confer rights of an embryo from the moment of conception. If passed, the measure would make Mississippi the first state ever to grant constitutional rights to an embryo. The consequences of such a move remain unclear, though many speculate it could make infertility treatments and birth control illegal and would all but certainly lead to a ban on abortion. In Philadelphia, longtime anti-poverty access to running for so-called People's Sheriff, Sherry Honkala, a member of the Green Party, says if she's elected, she'll oppose foreclosures and refuse to throw people out of their homes. New census data shows a record 49.1 million Americans, 16% of Americans, are now living in poverty. On Monday, the government released the new figures based on a revised formula of poverty. The new number shows 3 million more people are living in poverty than the official measure released in September. The new data shows 16% of Americans 65 or older are now living in poverty, a far higher figure than previous studies have shown. The Washington Post reports the biggest factor increasing the poverty rate for seniors under the new formula is out-of-pocket medical expenses. The new data also shows 28% of Latinos and over 25% of African Americans are living in poverty. Without food stamps, another 5 million would be living in poverty. In Chicago, over 1,000 senior citizens joined forces with Occupy Chicago Monday to protest cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. After a large march, about 50 people were arrested for blocking traffic on the street. Here in New York, hundreds of protesters marched from northern Manhattan to the Occupy Wall Street encampment. New York State Senator Ariano Espaillat took part in the march.
The council member and I began this because our communities for over decades have not been in a permanent recession. You know, we have double-digit unemployment rates. We have a lack of affordable housing, health care. We have very great needs, and for many years, even in affluent times, when the economy was doing better, we were left behind. So the message that's being sent by the people in Occupy Wall Street, we know very well. For decades, we know that message, and we want to show solidarity. We want to change the face of that movement to ensure that we also are part of that movement, to ensure that we pass a millionaire's tax that will bring greater resources to the state government so we don't have to do the cuts.
In California, video has been posted online showing an Oakland police officer shooting a rubber bullet or beanbag directly at a person who was filming the protest on the night of the general strike. Oh. In a recent interview with USA Today, former President Bill Clinton offered some of his thoughts on the Occupy Wall Street movement. Clinton said, quote, "They have an amorphous set of resentments for which I sympathize." He added, quote, "I don't think Americans can continue this level of income inequality." Clinton went on to suggest a change in the movement's strategy, however, arguing the encampment in New York City would benefit from a discussion with political leaders such as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo or Mayor Michael Bloomberg. French President Nicolas Sarkozy was overheard last week calling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu a liar in private remarks to President Obama at the G20 summit. The comments were overheard by a group of journalists. Sarkozy said in French about Netanyahu, quote, "I can't stand him anymore. He's a liar." President Obama responded, quote, "You may be sick of him, but me, I have to deal with him every day." The conversation apparently began with Obama criticizing Sarkozy for voting in favor of Palestinian membership bid at UNESCO, despite opposition from the United States and Israel. The State Department's Inspector General has opened a special review of the department's handling of permitting for the Canada to Texas Keystone XL oil sands pipeline, which could delay the final decision on the line until after the 2012 election. Opponents of the pipeline have expressed concern that the company the State Department hired to conduct environmental impact statements on the pipeline had financial ties to TransCanada. The Inspector General's announcement came a day after over 10,000 pipeline opponents formed a ring around the White House to protest the pipeline. You can see our interview with 350.org founder Bill McKibben at democracynow.org. The Australian Senate has approved a landmark law to force the country's 500 worst polluting companies to pay a tax on their carbon emissions. Australia is the highest emitter per capita in the industrialized world due to a heavy reliance on coal to generate electricity. The Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, supported the measure.
Today, Australia has a price on carbon as the law of our land. This comes after a quarter of a century of scientific warnings, 37 parliamentary inquiries and years of bitter debate and division. Today, our nation has got this done. It has taken the most effective step it can to cut carbon pollution.
Former President Jimmy Carter is visiting Haiti as part of an effort by Habitat for Humanity to build homes for the homeless following last year's devastating earthquake. Speaking to reporters, President Carter expressed disappointment that reconstruction efforts have been so slow.
I've only been here one day, and we've driven through Port-au-Prince and through part of the large city. I don't see any evidence of building homes for poor families. I see a lot of reconstruction of very large houses, where rich people live. Well, my understanding is that the pledges of funding has been quite large, but the actual delivery of the money and the spending of money for homes has been very slow. And I'll be sharing this opinion with the United States officials and with United Nations officials when I return to the United States.
The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has granted a stay of execution to Hank Skinner, who was scheduled to be executed Wednesday. Skinner was convicted of the 1993 deaths of his girlfriend and her 2 sons in Pampa, Texas. Questions have arisen over his guilt because multiple items from the crime scene have not been tested for DNA. And Michael Jackson's personal doctor, Conrad Murray, has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter for giving the singer a fatal dose of the powerful anesthetic propofol. The drug, which is normally used in surgery, was ruled the main cause of Jackson's death at the age of 50. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.